Filling in for Doug Parks, who's not able to join us at this point, but he expects to be calling in later. So at this time, I'd like us to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excuse me, I'm not really in shape to be doing this tonight, but next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Since Doug is not able to join us at this point, I would like to move to amend the agenda to withdraw the motion, and I have a prepared statement to read on his behalf. After an additional review with the Budget and Finance Committee, they requested clarification on some of the information presented. In the interest of ensuring that all details of the recommendation are fully understood, I am withdrawing the motion at this time. The requested clarification will be provided, and work will continue to move forward with this initiative. Can I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on amending the agenda to withdraw Doug's motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Any other amendments to the agenda?
Yes, I'd like to add to committee appointments John O'Connor and Leonard Hall, and that's for the Budget and Finance Committee.
I'll second that. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Is there any other amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move on to approval of minutes from the special meeting on April the 28th of 2018. I'm sorry, say again.
Approval of the agenda as amended.
Oh, thank you. I would now like to move for approval of the agenda as amended.
Move to approve it as amended.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Thank you. The agenda is approved as amended. Moving on, as I said, to approval of the minutes from the special meeting on April 28th of 2018. Are there any corrections to those minutes? Seeing that there are no corrections, can I have a motion to approve those minutes? May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the minutes from the special meeting?
I'm abstaining from that. I wasn't at that meeting, so.
Okay, so of the parties that are present, all are in agreement to approve, and there is one abstention from Mr. Maroney, who was not present. There are no other president's remarks other than the statement that I already read to you in connection with the removal of the motion. We'll move on then to the treasurer's report.
Cash position at 5/21/18 No, it just wasn't on. Sorry. The cash position at 5/21/18, the total is $14,643,192. It is significantly up from what we looked at a month or two ago because this is the time of year that we collect all the assessments. The breakdown is listed there. The money market, insured sweep account, $6,251,000, and then varying laddering CDARs, some of which come due this July, August, et cetera. And at this point, we have been reinvesting them as they come due because we are in a cash-rich position at this time of year. The operating accounts are $1,500,000, making the total $14,600,000. Okay, next slide. Oh, I didn't, oh, well, okay. Sorry, miscommunicated. I thought I was getting bullet points, but that's fine. It's just bullet points. I just wanted to address a few issues. The year-end financial statements, information about the timing of those statements is available on the website, and the projection for year-end, which we gave last month and the month before, is still at $1.6 million loss. The financial statement audit has begun, and the auditors were on site last week to begin the field work on the audit, and they will review all the management responses, which have been on the website, to what we've come to call the deep dive audit, which was significant additional procedures in addition to the normal financial statement audit procedures that are completed. They will review management's responses, and then they will ascertain whether in fact we're doing what we say we're going to do in those responses. In addition, we've asked the auditors this year to perform additional procedures in the payroll area, making sure that we are in compliance with procedures that have been recommended in payroll. The forensic audit, the auditors have been on site as of Monday after completing initial stages of planning. For the reserves, which we've been talking about for many months here, the reserve study by DMA has been updated with information from all our department heads, have reviewed the asset listings in the reserve study, and supplied information to update the asset listings to an accurate reflection of what our asset holdings are. The DMA has put this in their model, and a meeting is scheduled in June. Right now, it's looking sometime around the board meeting, probably before the board meeting, but separate from the board meeting, between DMA, the Board of Directors, and the Budget and Finance Advisory Committee. That's my report.
Are there any questions associated with the report?
Yeah. We had promised to put out a contact information if you had information that you wanted to send to the forensic auditors. That'll be posted this week now that they've started. The only thing that they ask is no rumor and innuendo. Put out facts if you have them so that they chase it and so that we don't waste association money. So if you have actual information, you will have an address and a contact name of a senior partner at Gross Medelson to go ahead and send it, and that'll be posted on the website this week.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment to the Treasurer and the Budget and Finance Committee. With regard to what's been done so far with the investments, and this is really a big improvement with the interest that we are getting on our cash, but I still believe that we need to do more. So I'd like to ask the Treasurer and the committee going forward, especially now that we have a huge amount of cash at the beginning of the year, the interest situation is changing on a weekly basis. Right now, I'm getting 1.7% interest on a 4-week Treasury bills. So I think we need to take a look at this, because this is a lot of money. If you take into account $6 million at 0.6% difference, you're talking about a sizable cash that we should be getting as a return on our cash investment. So please look into Treasury bills and get aggressive with a 4-week, which I think would help us address our operating cash needs. We don't need $6 million over the next 3 months period. So I'd like you to look into that, please.
Okay, thank you for that report. Moving on then to the next item on the agenda, the General Manager's report. Mr. Bailey.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I've got a slew of things to talk about tonight, so let's get right into it. The Drainage Working Group is made up of the following folks. Myself, obviously, as the GM, Eddie Wells, Kevin Layfield, Brian Hudson, Justin Reiner. These are all staff from Public Works Department. Residents, Mr. and Mrs. Tomarelli, Joe Beal, Scott Richardson, and 1 or 2 are always welcome because we're getting ready to write up a lot of things, and that will be of help to us. Worcester County, we have Commissioner Jim Bunting, Ryan Presock, and Bobby Shockley. We've held 3 meetings. The first one was with only the county representatives to discuss strategy, and thank you for Commissioner Bunting for attending that meeting. The second meeting was with residents and staff to brainstorm, if you would. We came up with over 40 different areas that we've identified that we want to address in a report on drainage in Ocean Pines. The third meeting was last week, I believe, and we met to begin to develop an outline of that report and what we wanted to include in the report, other than just information, but also appendices as examples of things, and a lot of recommendations to ultimately present to the Board of Directors for consideration for operations as well as budget in this next cycle. Our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 12th at the Public Works Building. Anybody's welcome to attend and see what we are working on. We have developed 5 different elements of drainage that will break down into additional areas to write up. Emergency situations, which we all know existed over the last week or so. Chronic problems that are not strategic. Chronic problems that are strategic and will require a little bit more engineering and a lot more money. Preventive maintenance, which is going to require some money, both for equipment and manpower. And then a huge education element about Ocean Pines drainage, what it's supposed to do, what it's designed to do, what it's not designed to do, and how we can get at some of our bigger problems. For June and July, we'll be developing that report, and at the July board meeting, we'll have a presentation of the report, including specific recommendations for operations, and a lot will be involved with the budget going forward. Now, with regard to mowing and landscaping, I gave a memo to the Board of Directors regarding the cutting the grass along the roadsides and the ditches and the lawnmower capital purchases. And if you'll indulge me, I will share that information with you. Obviously, the crews are out doing a variety of things, and we've gotten behind because of our focus has been the opening of the various seasonal amenities, particularly this year with the reopening of the Yacht Club and the Beach Club. In addition, the landscape crew is currently down 2 physical bodies, the supervisor and her number 2. Both are no longer with us. They left for other positions. This obviously was at a most inopportune time. The flowers arrived in the middle of last week, and then of course we had the deluge of rain over the last 2 weeks. Our mowing problem was compounded when we didn't get the new mowing equipment ordered in time, and that, when ordered, they were on back order. The old equipment used for this task was prematurely sold prior to the arrival of new equipment, and for that I take the blame for the miscommunication that took place with the staff on when to actually sell the equipment. At the time of the directive to sell the 2 mowers, I did not realize they were the very mowers that were essential to getting that ditch work done prior to the new mowers' arrival. Had I understood this to be the case, they would not have been sold yet, and thus we would have not gotten as far behind in the mowing as we did. Furthermore, with such an understanding, I certainly would have made a case to the Board of Directors earlier in the process. I would have shared this knowledge earlier with the board if I'd had the proper understanding of the transaction. Unfortunately, I did not, and that falls on me. The new mowers are due by the end of next week. However, beginning last week, we figured out a way to temporarily share the use of the Ventrac mower from the golf course for the sides of the ditches, and we should be caught up by the time the new mowers arrive. We also have a loaner available to us this coming week. We did ask for that earlier in the process, but it was not available to us at that time. This brings us to the issue of the golf maintenance Ventrac mower being quote-unquote purchased separately earlier in the process. Usually we do try to buy from the same vendors to achieve cost savings and better service. However, the mowers for public works are coming from a company called Iron Source, and that particular company does not sell to golf courses due to industry constraints. The golf course superintendent was able to get Textron to commit to deliver the equipment early, and I gave the authorization for that purchase to proceed. That mower arrived on May 2nd. In becoming familiar with our OPA process prior to the month of March, the only capital purchase that item that I had brought before the board was the unbudgeted use of the replacement capital reserve for the Beach Club sprinkler system. My first attempt to acquire budgeted replacement capital items that had already been vetted and approved during the budget process was at the March meeting. We all know how that turned out. Given the outcome of that meeting, I certainly have a better understanding of our capital purchase process, as well as the board's desire for certain additional support information and action requirements. In the end, we have no excuses for the existing situation and are working hard to correct it in the short term as well as the long term so that the current conditions are not seen again. Moving on to brighter things. The Yacht Club is rolling, and they did extremely well last weekend. There are always hiccups, but we haven't heard or seen too many of those. The food has been very good. I hope you can talk about that with each other, and that we can move beyond what has transpired over the last year. However, service is also good. Tomorrow, the Tiki Bar opens. I think we open tomorrow for lunch too, at 11. And lots of, if you haven't been yet, I think others that are here who have been can testify to the whole different look to the place. And same can be said for the Beach Club. That will open tomorrow. We are opening the Beach Club pool tomorrow. That's a day earlier than normal. Colby was able to figure out how to do that, but that's the only pool we're opening tomorrow. The sprinkler system is in place. We had a couple interesting things happen downstairs with the drainage there as well. We had enough sand pumped out of the system to probably recreate the beachhead, but that place looks a lot different as well. I think you will enjoy that this year as we move forward. Regarding the country club, we are getting ready to reissue the bids for the plans that we have. But going forward, we not only want to get bids for that, and this is something that the board needs to weigh in on, we've obviously put a lot of money into the building as it is. And I understand from a few years ago, we sort of had that discussion of whether or not we were going to tear it down and build something different, smaller, bigger, whatever. And we sort of made that decision with going ahead and doing the work downstairs on that lower level in the pro shop and the turn grill and the bathrooms. We're working on a compilation of all the money that has actually been expended to this point, but it's certainly several $100,000. The next step, as we know, we got bids back for a sort of a quick turnaround, if you would, on doing this phase 2, the second floor of the country club. And they were in the $840,000 to $880,000 range. What was also added into that to get to closer to between $900,000 and $1 million was if we did this during the summer months, we would need a trailer for the golf shop. We would need a trailer with some sort of food operations. We would need a trailer for bathrooms that were more than just porta potties. And so you had all that additional cost, and we did factor in the cost for tables and chairs and the accoutrements that would come along with the upgrades to that second floor. So the idea is to get that back out to bid with a different timeline altogether. But in addition to that, the collective we, I think, would agree that we would want to say, okay, if we've done phase one, we're looking at doing phase two. What about phase three? Because phase two does not include putting in the elevator. All it did was make sure that whatever we did in the second phase didn't prevent it from being put in the third. The warming kitchen, there's nothing done into that kitchen in phase two. It just exists the way it currently is. We would like to clean that out, obviously, and see if the existing equipment that's in there can still be operational. If that's the case, then it would be a really nice warming kitchen if that equipment can still work, but that's unknown right now. This idea of this phase three that's out there, we think it's important that we all together know where that might end up taking the total cost of the project. So what I would like to suggest is that as we go out to on phase two with the rebidding, that at the July board meeting, the board consider that and I can go out and get the cost estimate for this, to authorize us to get a concept plan for phase three and a budgetary estimate for what that would cost. So that when we get back the bids for phase two, we also have this concept drawing for phase three and the budgetary estimate that comes with that. That way it's all in. And we can, it may be a long time before we do phase three. We may do a portion of it, or we may do all of it. But at least we'll have an idea what that number would be. So that would be sort of where we are with the country club at this point. The crabbing pier at the sanctuary, the staff and I met with a group of owners from the sanctuary, and we developed an approach that we have proceeded to implement at this point. The crabbing pier itself is sealed off from direct easy access until further notice for safety considerations. The wetland pier itself is open for use. Appropriate signage is in place, including hours of use, which are dusk to dawn, or excuse me, dawn to dusk. The access path will receive a covering of mulch to cover the exposed tree roots that are in that area, and there is no designated parking area available for access. One must and need walk to this amenity. Now, staff is ready to go forward with an RFP for replacement of the crabbing pier and has been in contact with the county regarding permitting requirements. However, the owners in the area recommend that it be closed and removed. Thus, before proceeding any further, the question of whether we want a crabbing pier in this neighborhood or another location needs to be determined by the board. My recommendation is that the board acknowledge the actions to date and direct that the staff provide a recommendation on alternative location options, as well as sizes and costs for a designated crabbing pier within OPA, if you want to continue to have a crabbing pier. Disclosure packet process. There were some questions on some changes that had taken place to our process for preparing the disclosure packets. These are documents related to the sale of any property within OPA. The way this process works, the owner of a property or respective real estate agent or representative can go online or in person to get the request disclosure packet form. Once the form is filled out, it is physically in the possession of the OPA with the compliance permits and inspection staff, CPI. Payment must accompany the form in the amount of $250. That's by Maryland Code. Maryland Code 11B-106 of the Maryland Homeowners Association Act provides specific language regarding disclosures and notice for resale of lots within OPA. Every real estate agent and broker should be aware of these requirements and limits. Under the MHAA, OPA has 20 days from receipt of the request from the seller and the payment of the $250 to provide the disclosure packet. If the seller requests that the disclosure packet be returned within 14 days, the OPA can charge $50 more. If the seller requests that the disclosure packet be returned within 7 days, OPA can charge an additional $100 in addition to the original $250. Statistically, the OPA disclosure process, receipt, inspection, financial review, sign-off, and issuance, that being we receive it, CPI inspectors go out and inspect the property for any violations. We review the financial issues related to the property. Do they owe any assessment? Are there any liens on the property? We sign off on that, and then we issue the disclosure packet. That process takes approximately 7 days from the receipt of the request, sometimes less. OPA seeks to complete the disclosure packet within 5 days or less from the date of the request, 5 business days. Historically, OPA has not needed to charge any extra fee for the short turnaround because we're getting the request done in the expedited time frame without having a request by the seller to do so. We do not anticipate this changing anytime soon. Our disclosure packet request process has changed, however. The process is as follows. CPI staff receives the initial request, and they conduct the property inspection, usually within a day or two of receipt. Then the paperwork is delivered to the admin building for the inclusion of the accurate financial information. Have the assessments been paid, or does the OPA have any lien against the property, as I stated earlier? Inputting the financial information should not be done by CPI, as the CPI staff should not have full access to the financial accounting aspects of the properties. Another change that is being instituted into the process is for the physical pickup of the disclosure packet to be at the admin building instead of with CPI at the Public Works building. It's different than the current process. However, doing so in some cases may save a day in the process from that of transferring the documents back to CPI for pickup. And my understanding is that's what used to happen when CPI was located in the admin building instead of over at Public Works. So that's something we may look at in the future as well. There are several reasons for the change. First, the preparation of the disclosure packet has legal implications for the association, requiring that the information must be accurate. While there's no reason to believe that the errors were made in the past, adding an additional level of oversight will reduce potential opportunity for errors and reduce liability exposure. Second, as stated above, CPI inspectors should not have access authority to all of a property's financial information. This information can and should only be accessed by the administrative and finance departments of which membership services is a part. Third, CPI inspectors do not have the authority or the responsibility for signing the disclosure statement. While the general manager directly does not need to sign the disclosure statement, the authorized signer should be at least at the supervisor or department head level. In the new process, since the disclosure packet is already at the admin building for the financial input and that the GM has ultimate oversight, I have decided to sign them. The GM usually signs 1 to 5 disclosure packets every day, and if I'm out of the office, the Director of Finance signs them. This process has not slowed down the disclosure process. The last item I have on my report tonight is regarding the quarterly newsletter. There's also been discussion about particularly the summer newsletter because of its importance in relation to the election of the Board of Directors. The history of this comes from the budget process. When we were looking to save money, we cut about $34,000 in the budget, $17,000 in printing and $17,000 in postage related to changing the way we do our newsletters. We've historically produced 4 quarterly reports and 3 activity guides, and all 7 publications were being mailed to all addresses, those within the physical boundaries of the association and all off-site secondary addresses of owners. This year, 2018-19, we are going to be doing 6 publications, 4 quarterly newsletters, and 2 activity guides. So that's reducing to 1. Furthermore, again, to save money, we are posting these information items online and only mailing the hard copy publications to those members who subscribe to receive them. The subscription doesn't cost you anything. We just would rather send you 1 copy where you want it delivered versus sending 2 and wasting the printing and the postage for that. We just need the membership to indicate if you want to receive a hard copy, and if so, which address do you want it sent to. Note, we will still provide hard copies that are available for pickup at all of our various locations throughout the community, such as here at the community center. However, given the heightened importance of the summer edition of the quarterly newsletter due to its coverage material related to the Board of Directors election, we will be reallocating $15,000 within the Marketing and Public Relations Department budget. This amount will cover the expense of mailing the summer quarterly newsletter to all of the membership at all addresses, both within and without our physical boundaries. So that will happen for the summer quarterly newsletter. The other ones will be done, as I said, you just let us know which address you want to mail to. But the electoral version quarterly newsletter during the summer each year, that will be mailed out to all the addresses. That's all I have.
Any questions? Excuse me.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Bailey. On the country club plans, as you recall, the board passed a motion last month calling for RFP to be released, I believe, by June 1, which is a week away.
Next week.
And the motion also called for board reviewing the draft RFP prior to its release. We only have a week to go. Are you comfortable with meeting that deadline, or are you expecting to ask the board to amend the existing motion?
There's nothing really different between what was sent out before and what's being sent out now. I mean,
With the exception of what was sent out before, we never saw. At least I didn't.
Okay.
So that's why the motion called for giving the board an opportunity to review the RFP. So do you, is your intent to reissue the same RFP that was previously used without any changes?
Well, the plans themselves, the drawings haven't changed. The time frame and whatnot, there is no limit on the time frame, other than March of next year, we got to be done. That's really the only major change to it. I'll can certainly give it to you, obviously, I need to do that. But I don't think there's a whole lot of
Yeah, I would like
to
to,
look at.
yeah, I would like to ask that you,
Okay.
you share the RFP with the board tomorrow so that we have time, those of us that are interested in spending Memorial Weekend to review it. I certainly would like to take a closer look at that.
Was that RFP already put out on the website?
The
The
plans?
prior one? The prior
I
RFP?
don't think so.
Okay. So if it's there, it would make it easy.
The plans are, but. Let me check, okay.
Director Jacobs, that was one of the issues with the previous RFP, that it appears that it was never properly posted on the website.
Are there any other questions on, yes?
JB, can you give us, to the board, a little more information on the crab pier, who you know, number of people you talked to and everything else, so that we have a little better information as to when we say the people don't want it in that area, that's
Right.
a little,
There were 4 or 5 homeowners from the sanctuary that are right there at it. One was a little bit further away. And we met with them, staff, Mr. Kevin Layfield, myself, and one other staff person. There was some give and take on between those residents, whether or not to keep it or not. But where they came to at the end, all 4 of them, was that they would not want the crabbing pier itself there.
I have a follow-up question on the crab pier. This is really kind of a delicate situation, at least from my vantage point. The way I see it is that the members, certain amount of members, is basically asking the board to approve eliminating an amenity, which is recognized in a number of different documents. When the transfer of that section occurred between the developer and the association, all of the common asset was transferred, including the crabbing pier, with an understanding that it will be taken over by the association and maintained appropriately. I think maybe we should be asking our Bylaws and Resolutions Committee to give some guidance to the board. I'm uncomfortable with voting to eliminate an amenity. It doesn't matter whether the amenity is $20,000 or $2 million. It's like voting to eliminate a golf course. I don't know if the membership wants board to have that kind of a absolute power or authority. So same would be the case with a a sanctuary crab pier, I really think we need to rethink this as a board, how to handle this.
Well, that was part of the reason why the recommendation was that for the board to direct that we look at other locations. So it may be eliminated from that site, but it's not eliminating, because there were certainly a lot of folks that wanted to keep a crabbing pier that don't live in that area. And we're driving over there with no place to park. That is an unsolvable problem with the parking issue there at the sanctuary. So if there were to be a crabbing pier anywhere, we would want to look at somewhere where we could have a decent amount of parking. Doesn't have to be a huge parking lot, but.
And before we do anything, I think the important thing would be to find out from the state of Maryland whether we can even get a permit for a new pier at a different location. There's a lot, the regulations and restrictions are much tougher now than they were 20, 30 years ago. So the probability of getting a permit for something like this involves state-level applications, and Chesapeake Bay Foundation, DNR, et cetera, et cetera. I would not be in favor of demoing something and eliminating something without knowing for sure that we can actually have another pier
Right, there's a
somewhere
lot of
else.
questions that still need to be answered before any of that action takes place. Like I said, that the staff, we're ready to go. We've got an RFP ready to go to replace it. And we've already talked, Kevin's already talked with the county about any permitting requirements. How far I don't think we've taken that beyond the current location yet. But those are all the types of questions that we'd have to bring back to the board.
Well, let me leave you with two thoughts for my perspective as an individual director, and welcome my colleagues to share their thoughts. But I would suggest, number one, since the input you got from owners perhaps was more informal, I would say maybe what would be appropriate is you hold a public hearing as a GM and invite the members to make public comments on the pier, whether they're in favor of it or against. And I would also welcome Bylaws and Resolutions Committee to give board a guidance how to handle deciding on possibly eliminating this amenity, whether we even have the powers to do so. So those would be my two things, actions coming out of this discussion.
Yeah, I would say, we have three options here. Stay where it is and RFP it, relocate it if possible, or eliminate it completely. And I think really what the GM's asking for is direction to go ahead out and come back to us with some possibilities on the relocation of the property prior to going forward. And then I would agree with you, I don't think 4 is a representative sample to determine even if we're able to relocate it, there's the expense and everything else. Do we want to do that? So I think that's kind of the secondary thing. But I think if we were to direct the general manager to go out and give us possible options, then we can make a decision. Do we stay or do we go as the secondary part of this?
Any other discussion? Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Excuse me, that completes the GM's report, and so we'll move on to public comments. Please, if there are any members that want to make a public comment, remember to state your name and give your address, and you're allotted 5 minutes.
I'm Brett Hill, 3 Windward Court. I sent a message to JB and the directors back on April 30th, to which I got no response. And I guess to make it simple, the real question is, Ralph DeJulius Work Companies made a big deal at the town hall meeting about Calypso rum being $13.99 a bottle. And did we actually pay $13.99 a bottle for that Calypso rum? Because from the email that I sent you, JB stated that we did a modification to the valuation of our inventory in golf back in November that was part of the reason that that inventory number for golf got so inflated. When that adjustment happened, that resulted in a negative expense for golf, which allowed golf to post a $17,023 better than actual number for the month, because that $17,023 that was adjusted in inventory became a operational benefit to the golf department. So has that happened anywhere else in our inventory? And in particular, food and beverage was a number I asked about before. Did that happen to food and beverage, and is that possibly the reason why Ore Companies now has $13.99 Calypso rum? And that type of adjustment to me just is unexplainable. When I asked for an explanation and didn't get it, and I think it would, the memberships owed that when we're talking about such a large sum of money. And from the surface, it looks like an adjustment that was made to make an amenity look like it was doing better than it actually is. These type of activities are exactly the reason why I think other options need to be looked at in accounting and with the software that's managing accounting, because the fact that we're able to do these type of things, or these things happen, is a operational problem. And I don't think North Star is the answer to that. We have deeper issues. They go into process, and something needs to be considered there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Hi, good evening. My name is Tom Carlson. I live on Watertown Road. First off, I just want to thank the board for your for what you do. I know you're all volunteers, and it's a tough job, so I want to thank you for taking the time. I just want to go back to something I raised a couple meetings ago, and that's the internal controls. I think those are really important. I can't stress it enough. And I think a lot of the problems here, a lot of the recent issues are associated with not staying on top of those, not implementing those. And so those are very important. You got to implement them. You got to monitor what you're doing. And you've got to, most importantly, report back to the membership about those. In fact, you showed the internal controls, I think, a meeting ago or 2 meetings ago. And it's kind of quick, and you really need to get into that and give us a better explanation of what the key issues are that are outlined in those internal controls. Because we're hearing all about finances and issues, and it all goes back to having really good controls and how you're managing things. And one of those is much greater control over acquisitions. There needs to be, I think you really need to look at how your acquisition process works. I think there needs to be greater additional redundancies. You can't just, you got to look at how many people are, you want to make it, in some cases, in some ways difficult, because you want to ensure that you're getting a certain number of, bids and you're trying to avoid issues that can come back and hurt you, sir. You really want to avoid that. So you want to make sure that your acquisition process is really tight. And I get the impression that it's not. On the software that I've heard that we're buying, admittedly, I don't know a whole lot about it, so I'm just kind of talking from the dark. But knowing that there's a deep dive, and I work in this area, I would be really uncomfortable about going forward with going and buying a big purchase for software when I don't even know what my problems are. So I would hold off on that, because you may be buying something that doesn't help you with the problems that you've got. I'm glad to see drainage being your #1 priority. Thank you very much. That's, I know we're on a forested wetland. I get it. This whole area is built on a forested wetland. I mean, that's just the way it is. But it is a big issue for us. The yard, my understanding is the yard is not open for leaves or being
It's on the agenda.
Down.
It's on the agenda for later this evening.
Oh, thank you, because I would really like to see that kept open in the fall, the way you've done it in the past. It's really helpful, I think. And then on the FY18, we went from, for non-waterfront, we went from 921 to 951. And I would strongly encourage you all to look at maybe reducing the FY19 assessment. Not that 920 to 950 is really that big of a deal, but it's a good faith gesture to the community. I don't think, I just heard a lot of the candidates in the recent Maryland, the Democrat debate, and they were talking about, well, they're getting another $500 million. They could have a $500 million surplus this year, and about how they need to spend it on this or that. And nobody mentioned, well, maybe we ought to give some of that back. So think about that as you're moving forward. Hopefully we kind of get our finances in order and we can adjust that amount. Not that I need the $30 back, but I think it just makes a good gesture to the community. And lastly, I like that crabbing pier. Please keep that. That's an amenity for the community. If you do anything, look at that big chunk of money you've got, $8 million. Build another one. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Steve Tuttle, 40 Burr Hill, Ocean Pines. I was at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting last Tuesday for about 3 hours and listened to a very robust discussion about the North Star proposal and also a conversation about should we consider getting an RFP. And I really want to urge the board to, I don't know what Doug's motion, removing his motion, what that means for tonight, or whether you're still planning to go ahead with purchase of North Star, but I would highly recommend that you take the advice of the advisory committee and get an RFP out there to really look at what outsourcing would cost us and see if there is a savings and see if it can be compared to really do a thorough analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Thank you for the public. Moving on then, capital purchase requests.
Do you want to get a motion, or do you want me to go ahead and start talking first?
Why don't you talk about what
Okay.
you are asking for?
All right. What's before the board tonight is the replacement of 2 of the police department vehicles. They would be replaced with 2018 Ford Explorer with the police package. The budget amounts were $35,000 as we went through the Budget and Finance Committee and then the board adopting the budget last fall. These are from the replacement capital reserve. Again, the budgeted amount was $35,000 for each. The low bid is from Hertrick Ford of Milford, Delaware. $27,000 was the base bid, plus the emergency equipment, instead of getting that done separately, plus the taxes, $33,864, so slightly under the budgeted amount. 3 vendors were contacted, 2 have responded. Some additional background on these. The low bidder being Hertrick. Hertrick utilizes the Maryland contract for bid for police vehicles. This, and we're also including the equipment, emergency equipment from the factory instead of buying a stock vehicle and outsourcing the installation of that. I have a memo from the Chief of Police, Chief Massey, who's here tonight, if you have any other questions. We are currently the only police department in the county that does not have a take-home vehicle program for its officers. While that hurts with recruitment and retention, it does enable us to keep our fleet small. To illustrate that point, Berlin has 15 vehicles and Pocomoke 17. In our agency, we have 6 marked vehicles on the road on weekends between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. When our 2 patrol shifts overlap on the busiest days of the week. The 2 vehicles that are being replaced are the 2013 Ford Explorer with 132,000 miles on it currently, and the 2014 Ford Explorer, which actually has 152,000 miles on it. But it's more than just the miles, it's the hours that these vehicles operate. which we were just talking about with that being on the road a lot, and their engines are at idle a lot, so they have significantly more hours on them than perhaps the mileage would even indicate. So that's what's before you.
Are there any questions on the capital requests?
Yeah, I have a question. As you all know, a few days ago, I asked the GM for supporting information on this requisition because, number one, I was not able to find those two vehicles with the proper asset numbers in our reserve study, so I really didn't know the year and model of those vehicles that are being replaced. I wanted to have a clear understanding what exactly that we are replacing, which has been provided this evening to us. I guess the only other question I have is, I think the email from Chief Macy indicates that there has been an increase in repairs. So, you know, I don't know what the industry standard is as far as law enforcement vehicles when they get replaced at 100, 200, 300,000. I just have no idea what is the benchmark or the practice, or whether it's decided based on the repair history, which means, you know, it could be even 50,000 miles, but if the vehicle is constantly being repaired, you have an issue. But there's one other thing that comes to question. This information that we've been provided, obviously it's very helpful. I did make a comment that 2 or 3 days ago that the requisition was really not approved yet by the GM. The forms that we got have no approval signature. Has that been taken care of?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In your packet, it has.
Okay. It's not in the packet that I have. So I'm glad that that's been done. Now, one of the homeowners did come back to us with an observation that's related to aquatics vehicle and the low mileage, and it kind of begs a question, how often is that Explorer used? Because we still seem to be reimbursing employees for personal mileage on their vehicles within the same department, yet the department has a fleet vehicle for employees' use. So if those numbers are correct, and you're looking at about $1,000 in employee mileage reimbursement, I guess the question becomes, first, why are we incurring those losses and the fleet vehicle in the aquatics department has not been used properly? Number two, is that maybe, if it's not properly used, is that something that, can we repurpose that vehicle for, you know, for the police department and equip it with the proper equipment? It's kind of, you know, a logical question without knowing the other details related to, you know, the police vehicle emergency equipment and what else needs to be done to it. So I just wanted to bring this question for the sake of transparency, so the membership is comfortable with what we are doing.
There is a Ford Explorer at the Aquatics Department. It has a little over 10,000 miles on it at this time. The various people from the Aquatics Department utilize that vehicle. The history on it, my understanding, several years ago, or 2 years ago, I guess it was, the vehicle, the directive from the GM at the time was that it should not be utilized for transporting tools, equipment, things like that, keep it in a nice state. Therefore, what ended up, the individual that we are reimbursing for mileage uses their personal vehicle to haul that type of stuff around, and which I don't think that should be the case either. That exacerbates that need for the reimbursement of mileage question. The issue of whether or not that vehicle could be transferred to the police department for one of these two replacements, it's possible. However, there are a lot of things that have to be changed about that model. It doesn't have the police package, it doesn't have the police engine, it doesn't have the roll bar underneath the back seats around the spare tire. It doesn't have the metal board in it between the drivers and the passengers, or the computer setup in the front. So there are a lot of things that would have to be done to it. Not that that's $35,000 worth, but there's that aspect to changing that. We really need to get, maybe we take a different approach. One of the thoughts is, all right, what do we do with the two vehicles? If we replace these two, what do we do with those two? I would really say, let's take those and give another one to the aquatics department for that individual to get all that stuff out of her personal vehicle and use it as a fleet. And that way we don't have that reimbursement of the mileage for that person. In addition to that, when we sold the van for Park and Rec, they don't have a vehicle just to do things that they need to do around here. That way we would take care of three birds with that stone.
I would add that in the information that was provided to us, it was made clear, excuse me, that retrofitting a vehicle with all of the type of equipment that Mr. Bailey just mentioned, in fact, turns out to be more expensive than ordering it with that equipment to begin with. And that was in the material that was provided to us. So I don't agree that that would be a better utilization of that vehicle. And so we're kind of talking about two different situations here. And so what we have before us currently is a request, or two requests for capital purchases for the police vehicles. Is there any other discussion, excuse me, on those?
Well, yeah, I'd just like to add that I think that this is kind of address the issue of personal use and use the ones that have the heavy mileage on it to do the hauling around just within the community. Somebody breaks down, we're close enough. And that way we've kind of killed 2 or 3 birds with one stone.
They used to have an old truck for aquatics, and then I'm not sure what happened to that along the way, but then they got the Explorer, and the management at that time said, really sort of keep that for non-major material type of use.
So I would move to complete the capital purchase of both Explorers as proposed.
Do I hear a second for that?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? He's got his light on. No? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of approving the capital purchase request for the 2 police vehicles?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Next item on the agenda, CPI violations, 38 Canal Road.
It's not working.
Mr. Bailey?
This is for a violation on maintenance. There's a mattress and box spring outside the house, still there. The initial inspection was February 28th. It was addressed at the ARC meeting on April 3rd, and the recommendation obviously is at this point that it be sent to the Ocean Pines attorney for additional action.
Any questions about the CPI violation?
I would move that we find the owner in continuing violation and refer it to council.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you. Next on the agenda, unfinished business. Mr. Maroney?
I've got a proposed motion. The topic is the Ocean Pines Volunteer Fire Department finalization of budget for fiscal year 2018. The motion is as follows. The board approves an increase to the fiscal year 2017-2018 fire department budget of $165,621 in order to comply with OPA responsibilities under the Memorandum of Understanding between OPA and OPVD-FD. The adjustments being necessary in order to properly close the fiscal year 2017-2018 financial books. Background. In fiscal year 2017-18, $216,777 was transferred from the Capital Reserve Fund held in a trust through a custodial account by OPA for OPVFD to pay off the fire department notes for which OPA had principal and interest responsibility under the current MOU. The intent was a good one because this action would allow a reduction in interest payments due from OPA over the remaining life of the loan. However, there was no approval of this action by the OPA board, nor was any change to the MOU formally documented. During the review of the fiscal year 2018-19 draft budget by the Budget and Finance Committee, OPA became aware that, in the opinion of OPVFD, as part of the previous verbal understanding between the two parties regarding the loan payoff, the purchase of some equipment had been accelerated, and that OPVFD understood OPA would fund 50% of said purchases. This understanding of the verbal agreement was confirmed in a February 2018 working meeting between senior representatives of OPVFD and OPA, and a request for a portion of the funding was included in a letter from the fire department to OPA. In May of 2018, an OPA team met to review the history of the subject MOU with three goals. First, to share institutional knowledge to a number of individuals, including board members, members of the Budget and Finance Committee, and of course, the General Manager and Finance Director. Second, to agree on proper book entries before closing fiscal year 2017-18 books. And third, to ask the Budget and Finance Committee to consider and recommend changes in oversight of the OPVFD budget request, the reserve component, the housing and protection of reserve funds, and the general reporting of OPVFD operating results, all in concert and working with the OPVFD team, and to present the committee's recommendations to the OPA Board of Directors. Purpose and effect. Through this action, OPA will have restored the proper value of the OPVFD Capital Reserve Fund pre-note retirement, met our capital replacement reserve contribution per the approved budget, provided the proper basis for funding through the MOU for the equipment already purchased by OPVFD, continue any future benefit from the note retirement, and ensured that the OPA has followed the legally agreed upon terms that govern the relationship between the two parties.
Thank you for that motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed. Thank you. Now moving on to new business. Mr. Maroney.
All right, I hate to do this to all those present, but we're about to hear the same thing over and over several times. This is the first reading of changes to resolutions governing advisory committees. At the request of the Board of Directors, the Bylaws and Resolutions Advisory Committee reviewed and recommended a number of changes in April of 2017. This will be the first reading of some of those changes with recent modifications. For the purposes of brevity, I will list them each in order. A full red-line copy is part of the board packet on the OPA website. C-01, Committee General Policy. In paragraph 2, authority, remove, quote, Article 3rd of the Charter and Section 10.01 of the Bylaws of Ocean Pines Association, Inc., direct the board to establish and appoint the members of such committees and other advisory bodies as may necessary or convenient in the association's discharging the duties entrusted to it. Replace with the Charter of Ocean Pines Association, Inc., and the bylaws of the association direct the Board of Directors to establish and appoint the members of such committees and other advisory bodies as may be necessary to or convenient in the association's discharging duties entrusted to it. In paragraph 3B3, remove, quote, they may, however, request routine administrative assistance and necessary office supplies. On C-03, budget and Finance Advisory Committee, we're making the exact same changes to Article 2, and that's primarily because the governing documents has changed, so we're bringing the articles into that conformance. We're also in C3, Budget and Finance Advisory Committee, Article 3D, remove, quote, and General Manager. Article 3K, remove, quote, and General Manager. C4, Bylaws and Resolutions Advisory Committee, we're making the same changes in Article 2 that I just read to you and are on there, which changes the governing regulations. In C5, Clubs, Food and Beverage Advisory Committee, in Article 1, Purpose, remove, quote, and General Manager, end quote. In Article 1, Purpose, change the reference to the Golf and Country Club to just, quote, Golf Club. In Article 2, Authority, again, the same change in taking out the specific reference to the charter and replacing it with more general information. C-06, Communication Advisory Committee, in Article 1, Purpose, remove, quote, and the General Manager. In Article 2, make the same changes to the charter and section and replace it with the more general language. C-08, Elections Committee, making the same changes in Article 2, Authority. In Article 6 of that same Elections Committee, eliminate, quote, the chairperson shall consult with the general manager regarding the association staff assistance necessary to carry out the election process and a timeline for required actions. The general manager may authorize the chairperson and committee members to work directly with the association staff in accomplishing these actions. C-11, Golf Advisory Committee, the same changes to Article 2 under Authority. In paragraph 3D, remove, quote, D, assisting the OPA Marketing Department in promoting Ocean Pines golf in the broader community, end quote. C-13, Recreation and Parks Advisory Committee, in Article 2 Authority, making the same changes previously referenced in the other articles. C-15, Aquatics Advisory Committee, the same changes to Article 2 Authority. That's the first reading of those, and primarily what has happened is that the change of the governing documents required that we change the authority in a number of our C resolutions going forward.
Thank you. Are there any questions associated with the first reading of those C resolutions? Actually, I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
What was the purpose of removing "and the general manager"?
The purpose is that this dates back more than a year, okay, because that was in the original C changes that were presented to the board in April of 2017. And the thinking at that time, and that will be part of what I'm about to talk about on the topic here in a minute, but the thinking at that time was that these are board advisory committees and they should be basically reporting to the board and not really involving the general manager. And so when we get to the topic, you'll see where we're going to be able to address that going forward in a little more detail.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? Oh, actually, I did have one other one. Sorry. The removal in C11 under the Golf Advisory, assisting the OPA Marketing Department, what was the purpose of removal of that language?
That was an operations issue and not an advisory committee issue. So that, again, when we get to the topic of my next topic here that I want to discuss, that will give us the opportunity to really address these a little bit more if we adopt this.
But we don't want the advisory committee out there spreading the word about our golf?
If you read what it says assisting the OPA marketing department. So there was some question as to whether the wording there was working with them or just working to spread the news. So.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? That completes the first reading of the C resolutions. We have a first reading of Resolution B08. Director Horn.
Okay, this is a resolution that was requested to address Director Ethics and Conduct. The purpose is to provide policy regarding ethics and conduct for members of the Board of Directors and officers of the association, the Ocean Pines Association. The authority is Section 512C of the bylaws. And I'm not going to read the whole document. It's on the website for you to review. I'm just going to indicate the highlights of what you will find when you do access this document. There's a section on policy, and the policy section addresses itself to some ethical standards. There are 9 points there that provide guidance to the board in that area. And then there's a section that addresses itself to director conduct specifically. And the sections within this have to do with the handling of confidential information, the interaction with association employees, and handling of conflicts of interest. The next section talks about how complaints regarding violations of either the ethical standards or the policies on director conduct would be handled. It provides for the development of a standing ethics committee that would provide independent review and recommendation back to the Board of Directors regarding the handling of these. Within that committee, there would be the authority to access a pre-selected law firm with expertise in this area based on a letter of engagement that would be written if this is all approved. And, you know, obviously the ethics, there would need to be a resolution authorizing the formation of the Ethics Committee and articulating all of its purposes and authority. And then there's a section that talks about how an Ethics Committee would address the complaints. It talks about the process for selection of legal counsel. It talks about the disposition of a legal opinion that would be secured if the Ethics Committee would find the need to engage a law firm to conduct investigations. It talks about remedies. There are 2 levels of remedies. One level of remedy addresses itself to violation of the Code of Conduct, the authority for which is in the bylaws, and then this Section 5.12B of the bylaws. And then there is lesser provision for lesser remedies that would address themselves to the handling of ethical violations. There also is language that talks about the record keeping of the meetings and the disposition and the ultimate board vote on how to address the complaints, which provides for that information being made public to the membership. So I would encourage you to take a look at this online, and this would constitute the first reading of Resolution B08.
I would like to point out that this copy still does not have the correction that I made on 4B. It is still saying timely and in no case less than 14 days. And I had asked, and you had agreed to make that correction to be no more than 14.
I'm sorry. Yes, you're right.
That's okay.
That's a mistake that will be corrected.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a comment. I actually attended the working group session between the ethics group and the public hearing on the subject, and I expressed the concern I have over the effort to create resolution B08. I can understand and appreciate the intent, but there are there are a lot of things in this resolution that actually are, in a way, a duplication of what already exists in some resolutions and actually in the bylaws as well. And there are also probably a number of flaws here. And, you know, the only thing I can say is if this resolution B08 existed last year, I would probably not be sitting at this table today. And obviously that, I think that speaks, I'm going to let the membership figure out what that actually means by what I said. I can go into some of the things now, or I can share with you my comments later. But just a simple example that the resolution calls for allowing the board to create ethics committee, to me is self-serving and conflict of interest in itself, especially if you have a majority of the board that might have a certain view or opinion on the issues, like last year that I had to live through. So I'm just going to go on record to say that I fully respect the work that was done so far on this. However, I would be more in favor of putting together what exists in many places, which is a code of ethics document that each director should be asked to sign and acknowledge, just like we ask employees to sign and acknowledge that they have received the employee handbook and they understand all the policies, rules, procedures. And if the director that wishes not to sign that, then that's a separate issue. But I'm not concerned with a positive intent. I'm concerned with the negative things that actually this resolution can create if enacted. So for that reason, I didn't want to wordsmith and change the things in this draft in the first reading, because I really, the more I thought about that since that working group meeting last week, the more I felt that this is really not something that we should do. I would be more in favor, like I said, and I'll be happy to put together an example document of ethics code that we can review collectively and decide whether we want to implement that, and perhaps going forward from that phase, maybe look at something later on, how we can bring together the bylaws language and the resolution B05 and other things in a way that maybe can improve the current process that we already have. So I just want to go on record with how I feel about this.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? All right.
I would just like to respond to that. I differ in, obviously I differ on your opinion on, quite a bit of this. As you'll recall, when I put forth the motion, the purpose was to provide language that would give better guidance to the board, particularly in matters in which removal from the board might be under consideration. And I do beg to differ that you would not be sitting at this table if this were in effect last year. So, at any rate.
Thank you. Next item, Mr. Mar No, thank you. The next item on the agenda is discussion, joint work session. Mr. Maroney.
All right, now I'm going to answer all your questions. This came about as part of our last Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, and I'm asking that the Board of Directors consider a joint work session with the Bylaws and Resolution Advisory Committee for the specific purpose of reviewing, discussing several of these C resolutions and perhaps MO9. And the background on that is that the Bylaws and Resolutionary Advisory Committee has submitted revisions to the C resolutions controlling the advisory committees. In some cases, no action was taken for over a year. In other cases, further changes to other governing languages warranted additional changes to the resolutions. Given the greatest institutional knowledge of the governing documents lies with this committee, and in an effort to fully discuss the operation of board committees that are both administrative and in some cases more operationally oriented, a joint meeting will allow frank and open discussion and hopefully resolution. This would allow the board committee liaisons to represent their committees, which will facilitate discussions and allow for adopting resolutions that do not need constant minor amending and then can be reviewed on a regular schedule. What's happened here is that almost every board gives a different direction to the bylaws committee. In some cases, it's take out the general manager, and in other cases, it's doing it, and we've never really sat down and discussed the reasons. There are some of these committees that need to, go ahead. It's not a motion, it was just a topic. Doesn't it say topic for discussion at the top?
Yeah, it's just topic for discussion.
Okay. You're the one that told me. So what and this actually came up in the committee, that perhaps the best thing to do would be to sit down, open meeting, but have the bylaws committee and the board sit in there and discuss each of these C resolutions, because even within the bylaws and resolutions committee, where a year ago, the majority of the committee voted to do one thing, just in our meeting the other day, or a week ago, there were disagreements as to what I read tonight. However, the majority of the committee had recommended this. So I think that the best thing to do would be to sit down and we can address why isn't the general manager. And some of them, the general manager doesn't need to be in. In order to be effective, the others, the general manager should be consulted. Perhaps the golf one is a good example of helping market golf. What does that really mean? So my suggestion is that we set up a time when the committee and when the board, at least, a number of board members can get together, and have those board members also talk to the committees they're liaisons to, so they bring kind of, hey, how do you feel and how do you see we fit, and see if we can't fix these once and for all, and then get on to the 2-year cycle we have. I feel like the last 4 or 5 meetings, I'm reading almost the same resolutions every meeting, and we're making minor changes to it. So that's just a topic for discussion, and I'd like to see if the board is in agreement that we try to schedule a meeting to do so. And I think, I really think if you go through a couple of these bylaws and resolutions committee meetings, you really get an education on the history of Ocean Pines and how we got to certain ways and why. So.
Well, I think your planned meeting and adopting resolutions that do not need constant minor amending is admirable. I don't think it's ever going to happen given our governance structure. But I would support the idea of trying to move in that direction.
I agree. I would certainly support moving in that direction, but I'd like to see a more direct role of the committees themselves, perhaps the chairs, in addition to the liaisons, participating in the meeting.
Have no problem with that at all?
I was going to suggest the same thing, that the chairs of the committees ought to be included.
Yep, I'm good. I agree.
Are you going to be shepherding this whole effort?
I'll be happy to do so.
Yeah, I'm totally in favor, Ted. So if you propose a couple of dates, I attended the last meeting and it was very educational, and I'd love to take part in this. I think it's going to be very helpful.
Moving on the agenda, we have a discussion, excuse me, discussion on leaf drop-off service. Mr. Trendick.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm going to read the statement for those of you who haven't seen the agenda so that you're at least aware of the topic. A discussion between the board and the general manager about his recent change to this leaf drop-off service and to explore the possibility for bringing it back. Background. I learned about this change a couple of weeks ago from few homeowners. They felt The membership was not offered an opportunity to provide any input before eliminating this popular convenience. So that is basically the intent, we did ask the general manager to kind of come prepared with some ideas, which I see from a little handout that he has done so. There's some great suggestions. They all have a certain price tag associated with this, but that's the reality. So, you know, if you can share with the board your recommendations, sure. And then the membership will also be able to benefit from that.
A little history, what happened to it? Well, back during the budget development, looking to save money, the opening in the spring cost us about $30,000 during the month of May to operate the yard and receive yard debris. When we do the leaves in the fall, from middle, a little before, let's say middle of November through middle of December, that costs us about $100,000. Leaves are usually a bit more important than the general cleanup, so we didn't touch that side of it. We eliminated having the yard open during the month of May to save $30,000. Now that's where that came from. However, we took a look at things and all right, how can we do something different to serve the residents' need as well as be mindful of the financial aspect of it. So with that, I'll share with what I've presented to the board. We would open the yard on Saturdays only, excluding holiday weekends. It would be for the residents to dispose of yard debris, leaves, branches, trimmings, brush, no garbage, no construction debris, or bulk trash. Bagged leaves and yard debris in paper bags will be allowed. If you bring it in plastic bags, we'll ask you to rip it open and deposit it that way. We could start and have the yard open to the residents on June 2nd, not this Saturday, but the following, and go through November 17th, Saturdays only. The exception being September 1st, which is Labor Day weekend. The hours would be from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., again on Saturdays only. We will open in the fall on our usual schedule, November 19th through the December 22nd. That's Monday through Saturday. Again, that's for the leaves. The hours in the fall will be 8 to 3 Monday through Friday, and then 8 to 4 on Saturdays. We will need to have a way, if we do this on Saturdays, beginning June 2nd, we will need to have a way of making sure that residents only are using the public works yard for disposal of their yard debris. This has been an issue in the past, evidently, with contractors bringing debris to our yard instead of taking it to the proper disposal sites in the county. Thus, residents will be required to show their ID so that we can make sure that they are residents and not contractors. Now, we recognize that there are several contractors who are also residents. That will be fine. That's their benefit, I guess, of being here. But if a contractor, if you've hired a contractor that's not an Ocean Pines resident, they need to take it to the county. Otherwise, you're paying for it twice, once to the contractor and once through your association assessment dollar. So that's why they'll need to take it on to the county sites. The actual cost to pursue this course is unknown because of the unknown volume of the material that will actually be dropped off. However, again, we typically spend around $30,000 in the spring for the yard, as opposed to $100,000 in the fall with the leaves issue. We have space in our yard to stockpile leaves and debris throughout the summer and then dispose of them in the fall. That will save us a little more on the upfront costs that may come later. Furthermore, a lot of the branches we receive, we recycle into mulch that we utilize at the dog park and some of the walking trails, and we'll see if it's possible to do more of that recycling. The cost of labor should run between $4,000 to $8,000 for the Saturdays from beginning June 2nd through the middle of November. That depends on whether or not we need one employee or two. And that depends on the cooperation we get from everybody that's using it. If we get by with one employee, that'd be great. But between monitoring the traffic in and out and helping folks, it may need to. While the expense of operating now is not budgeted, I believe we can figure out a way to cover the Saturdays only. We will certainly monitor the costs, and if we need to stop the Saturday operations before November, we may have to do that. Longer term, though, an idea for consideration. We may want to consider the possibility of a yard waste area that is open year-round. That can be operated as a compost mulch facility, a place where residents could drop off debris, it gets recycled, and then is offered back to the residents to beautify their properties without cost. Please note that such an effort will require a lot of research, will require some money, and obviously working with the county and state regulatory agencies on limitations and permitting. It may or not be feasible, however, it may be a possible solution to our problem as well as to our residents' needs.
Thank you. Are there any questions on what Mr. Bailey just presented?
Yeah, so are you saying you can open this thing within the budget constraints you have right now? You can find the $4 to $8 grand?
We can do that, and we will monitor the costs, and if it gets to the point where we can't handle it anymore, then we'll have to revisit it and shut it off.
Okay, and on a bigger question, should we really be providing this service at all? Okay, I mean, to me, you can put out bags every week and, you know, or if you use our thing, and if not, you couldn't. And you know, I'm also against any contractor using it because, you know, who says who's going to do it? I mean, if you take $130,000 a year to operate that on this, that's $15 per person sitting in here, and given everybody's bitching about assessments going up, there's a problem right there. And everybody needs to remember that whether it's this or drainage or anything else, you want, it costs. And so I have, to be frank with you, I'm just not sure that we should be providing that service to the residents. I'm not sure that that's our responsibility to do that as a community. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Ted, just to comment, you make a very good point, and I think the intent of putting this topic on the agenda is really to kind of have this open discussion, because obviously the change in a service took place that took many by surprise, because it's a service that a lot of membership got accustomed to. But I think what we have to do is look at the advantages, disadvantages, and cost associated, and whether this is something that the association should provide or not going forward. It's a good discussion to have, and I think it's something perhaps if the general manager can come to the board later on and make a recommendation, maybe the board can take an action on the specific topic in a form of a motion.
Yeah, my feeling is if he can do it within budget constraints right now, but what I'm really worried is if it's costing us $100,000 to $130,000 a year, you know, I mean, is that a necessity? So.
Those are the questions we always ask. How much do you want us to do for the community, and what are you willing to pay for it? Next item on the agenda, discussion on Resolution B04, 3B format. Director Trendick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Ms. Chairperson. I will read the statement. To recommend that the required statement and background that accompany director's submitted discussion topic are also included in a published board packet. Background. This recommendation is based on a recent feedback from the homeowners' request for more supporting information on the proposed discussion topics in advance of the board meetings. And I'm very happy to have complied myself today with this requirement, and happy to see that Director Mahoney has done so. I think it was a very good feedback from the membership, because we often do our communications between each other in preparation for the meeting, and we let all the directors know what it is that we want to talk about, but the membership is not always aware of that. And creating this kind of a format and putting it out will only serve as a benefit to the membership, so they're aware of the topics that the board intends to discuss. So that's all I wanted to say at this point. If there are any other comments from other directors, I welcome them.
No, I would just say I'm in total agreement of that. I think that we should all agree that more information is better.
Yeah, I'm in agreement, and, you know, Slobodan did it, and I did it as well for topics for discussion, because it gives a little bit of feedback, and it not only helps everybody else understand it, it helps all of us understand the reasoning behind what we're doing.
I would say that it's really a good thing also because it enables community members to see more information, and then they can send directors questions or comments prior to the meeting. So we have that ability to, because our current comment portion of the meeting is not a give and take, this allows them to get in touch with us ahead of time and pass along any information that they might want to comment or ask questions about. So thank you. Next items on the agenda are appointments. We'll take them one at a time. Ted, the first one is yours.
Yeah, I'm moving that Lisa Schwartz be reappointed for a third term on the ARC Committee.
Any discussion? All in favor of the appointment of Lisa Schwartz? Aye, thank you. Next one is Frank Daly to Strategic Planning. Mr. Trendick, is that yours?
Yes, I move to appoint Frank Daly for a second term to Strategic Planning Committee.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, both are appointed.
I have two that I added.
Oh, so sorry.
The first is John O'Connor, and John O'Connor would be appointed for a fourth term, which is a one-year extension to the Budget and Finance Committee. He's been on that committee for 13 years.
All in favor? Signify by saying, excuse me, are there anybody comment on that?
The only question I
questions?
have is there somebody else that would, that's waiting to get on this committee, or?
We don't have anybody asking to come on that there isn't room for. I have another nominee tonight, a new member of the committee also.
Okay, thank you.
And this is a one-year extension, not a.
I just have a general question. Is the president supposed to appoint these people to the committee with board approval?
They're to be recommended and signed off on by the liaison to the committee, but yes, they are appointed by the president with the board approval. I'm acting on the president's behalf today in his absence.
So should you appoint?
I guess the answer to that would be yes. And I'm asking for the board's approval when I ask you all if you're in favor of the recommendations that are being made, so. Okay. All right, so were there any other comments or questions on Mr. O'Connor? Seeing none, all in favor of his one-year extension, which would be a fourth term or a waiver, actually. All in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Thank you.
And I'd like to recommend Leonard Hall for his first term to the Budget and Finance Advisory Committee.
I'll second.
Are there any questions about this recommendation? Seeing none, I'll ask all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, so just to recap then, for the record, we have appointed and I'm in agreement with appointing Lisa Schwartz to third term for ARC, Frank Daly to a second term for strategic planning, John O'Connor for a one-year extension, and Leonard Hall. I have a feeling this is Doug calling in, if you'll excuse me 1 minute. I'm sorry, Doug, we just completed the agenda, and we are at the point of, excuse me? We are at the point of a motion to adjourn to closed session. Did you want to make that motion?
Oh, you're asking me? Yeah, I mean, of course, it's on the agenda. Let's go.
Okay. This time we'll make a motion to adjourn to a closed session for contractual issues as permitted by the Maryland Homeowners Association Act, Section 11B, 111-4, a meeting of the Board of Directors or other governing body of the Homeowners Association or a committee of the Homeowners Association may be held in closed session only for the following purposes. 1, discussion of matters pertaining to employees and personnel. And 6, consideration, was little I, and then 6, consideration of the terms or conditions of a business transaction in the negotiation stage if the disclosure could adversely affect the economic interest of the homeowners association. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, is there any discussion about going into closed session?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment just for transparency and clarity. The purpose for going into closed session for personnel reasons is the board is reviewing general manager's mid-year performance, and that will take place tonight in a closed session. And the second purpose is a review related to the media contract. Those are the two topics.
Any other comments? I'll entertain a motion then, I entertained a motion, there was seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned to move into closed session. Thank you.